Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Please. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy New Year, and welcome back to this regular hearing of the Budget and Finance Committee. Today is Monday, January 12th, 2015. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the Committee, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Council Members Paul Kretz and Bob Blumenfield, and we are ready to begin. Colleagues, first of all, I'd like to ask for your consideration as consent candidates items 5, 6, 9, 11, sorry, 11 and 12 have cards. So 5, 6, and 9 as consent candidates?
I did have a question on number 5.
Okay. So items 6 and 9, without objection, will be deemed approved on consent. Why don't we go ahead and take item 5 then?
It's a
and
closed session.
Oh. Okay. Yep. Okay, so that'll be held for closed session. Sorry about that. All right, well then we'll go then next to our regular agenda. Our closed session items will defer in the interests of the time of the audience who's here. We have a lot of people here on other matters that are in our regular session, so we'll hold our closed session items until the end of the meeting. Anybody who's here on the closed session items, if you want to head back to the office and listen in, you're welcome to do that. So we'll begin with item number 7.
Item number 7 is a motion Krikorian Blumenfield relative to requesting the departments affected by the December 8, 2014 fire in downtown Los Angeles to report on immediate budgetary needs and request the city attorney to explore, if warranted, any claims of negligence to recover any city damages.
Who's here on item number 7?
I believe there's staff from the CAO GSD here.
All right, come on up. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Patty Huber with the CAO's office. As you're aware, one of the towers of our Figueroa Plaza was damaged in the Da Vinci fire. Since that happened, our office, in coordination with GSD, and they've been doing a lot of the work, as well as with the insurance adjusters and the property managers, CBRE, have been addressing all of the most immediate sort of issues in the building, including getting the building boarded up as we had a major rainstorm coming in, starting to deal with water damage in the building to dry it out so we didn't have more issues with mold and so on, as well as obviously moving all of the city departments that were located in that building into temporary space. We also had a number of floors leased in that space to a law firm, LBBS. They have made arrangements to move as well. At this time, we have been, Council has taken actions authorizing GSD to begin expending insurance proceeds as they come in. We have received an initial check from the insurance company of $5 million. We are continuing to work with them on the claim and on additional monies coming in.
What's the policy limit?
It is a $1 billion policy with a $100,000 deductible. Okay. We are continuing to, we have located temporarily all of the displaced city employees into spaces around the city, and GSD has been working very diligently to find a long-term solution because we anticipate that the repair of the building is going to take anywhere from 6 months to a year to complete before we would be able to move back in. And so we are looking for the more permanent long-term space so that we can ensure our employees are in appropriate space that meets city space standards as well as ergonomic standards, because we were not able to accomplish that in the short term. Excuse me. We're all
That's
here to answer
an appropriate
questions.
time to turn the mic over to someone else so you can recover. Hi.
Hi, good afternoon. Melody McCormick from GSD. In addition to what has already been discussed, the General Services Department has assigned a liaison from its real estate services staff to work with each department. Those liaison assignments were made on the very first day of the incident, and they have been working hand in hand with each department. Our general manager has been holding weekly meetings with the GM as well as daily stakeholder meetings to ensure that everyone's needs are addressed. We are very close to securing the long-term lease location, and we are looking forward to continuing to assist them in whatever it is that they need.
Okay. So in addition to securing the space, there's obviously going to be immediate need for build-out expenses. There's going to be need for replacement supplies and equipment, I assume, as well as other displacement-related costs. When would we be able to expect any requests for mid-year budget augmentation that'll be necessary to cover those, or will it be necessary?
Okay. Initially, during the first week of the incident, GSD had, in communicating with each of the department coordinators, had taken responsibility for the initial purchase of any additional furniture, chairs, equipment that is needed in order to help departments adjust to their short-term locations. In other words, the facilities that they are currently located in and will be, for that 45 to 60-day periods. It was critical. We were following ITA, actually. It was critical that we located them into existing city space because of the connectivity issues. And so GSD made all the initial purchases. As departments have become operational, they have begun ordering replacement supplies and equipment on their own. Every department's been advised to keep track of those costs, and the CAO's risk manager will be asking for information on that. I know the CAO's already developed a report capturing those initial costs, but we will continue to track those as we go forward.
We are, just for the record, we are anticipating that all of those costs will be covered by insurance to the extent that it is just replacing things that were damaged or destroyed in the fire. As it relates to betterments in the building where we maybe want to improve upon what was there, that would be something that we would have to discuss. It's much too soon to know the answer to that question at this point. To the extent that departments need to move funds or need an interim appropriation, we would bring those forward. But our expectation is replacement lease space for the interim, build-outs, any of those things. We actually anticipate that the insurance company will cover all of that for business continuity purposes. At least that's what our risk manager has been advising us.
And
And we may need some cash flow issues, but so far we have not run into any of those issues.
So our damages, the other third parties' damages, as well as the property owner's damages, can all reasonably be met within the policy limits?
That's our expectation.
The LBBS, the law firm that occupies the 8.5 floors there, they have their own insurance policy for their contents and tenant improvements, and their insurance company adjuster is also on site, and they have their own restoration and contents removal company that's working closely with them on that issue.
That's good for them and getting up and running for them, but I'm assuming that they're going to have an indemnification claim against the other insurer as well, which would be money out of the pot that wouldn't be available for us. So that's why I want to make sure that we're estimating that all of it's going to be covered within that.
Yeah. And I mean, our insurance adjusters and their team are on site every day. Our risk management people are there. Everybody is talking. It's like, okay, that the insurance has said they will pay for this, then that's what we're doing. We're just keeping close tabs on everything as we move forward.
Very good. Mr. Blumenfield.
So following up on that, so that means, answering the chair's question, there will not be another budget request vis-a-vis this unless it's for cash flow or something to that effect, because we expect pretty much 100% to come out of the insurance policy.
That is what we're anticipating right now. As I briefly indicated, as we move forward with actual renovation of the building, to the extent that the city wants to do something that would be considered a betterment, something better than what was there, which we may want to consider just as you're redoing a building. So do you want to repair the roof versus replace the roof? As an example, we don't know the answer to any of these questions at this point. That may be something that as a city we have to make a decision on. That would be something that would come back for
And that's
approval.
for betterment. I mean, there's always this, like with car insurance, there's the replacement
Replacement.
value versus the loss value. And whether you get the car, the price of what your car was worth at the time, which wasn't very much because it was an old car, or the amount to get a like car. And what I'm hearing is our insurance isn't just about the loss value, but it's to get us another car of equal value that's up and running.
Yes, and we are talking about a building that the city purchased as a Class A building and has been maintaining as a Class A building, so we would expect a Class A building at the end of this.
Great, that's good news. Have there been estimates on some of the damages in terms of the damages to computers or to the building or anything like that is shareable at this point?
There is the city's contents removal company called ATI is still working on that loss inventory. And, because 308 windows were blown out and the heat from that fire, either melted or much of the computer equipment on the north side of that building suffered extensive water damage. We are still looking to ATI to develop that complete inventory loss, and we'll be able to report that at some future date.
And then the various engineering firms and so on that are on site are continuing to do a very detailed forensic analysis of the damage to the building, so we do not yet have a firm estimate on the cost to replace or to repair the building. But it's significant.
Mr. Kretz?
Just a complete aside, but as long as we're talking about the building, I know there's a fair amount of graffiti in that vicinity, and rather than attract additional illegal activity and blight, et cetera, I'd just encourage us to look at painting that out pretty quickly, whoever is responsible for that.
We can reach out to Board of Public Works that has community beautification and see what they are able to do.
Very good.
Okay. So we're just receiving filing of that. No need for action at this point. Thank you very much. Appreciate that report. And that brings us to item number 8.
Item number 8 is the city administrative officer's report relative to Los Angeles City Health Commission, Arts, Parks, Health, Aging, and River Committees approved as amended on December 8, 2014.
That's me again.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Patty Huber with the CAO. We have issued a couple of reports on the establishment of the City Health Commission, the Arts, Parks, and Health Committee, if I said that right, took action on the second of our reports. The recommendations in that report are for the City Council to begin appointing its City Health Commissioners, to assign the commission to the Office of the City Clerk, and then to instruct our office with the commission to evaluate the operational needs and report back to council. However, the main issue at this point is that the ordinance as written says that the department is supposed to be funded in a revenue-neutral manner, but not from the general fund. After looking at all the various funding sources that the city has available to it, the only one that is eligible to fund this is the general fund. So you sort of have any staff that you assign to support the commission would have to be paid for from the general fund, yet you can't do that. So therefore, as written, the report is making the presumption that the commission is going to, for the most part, be fully supporting itself. The city clerk has identified the need for a position, and they're willing to take this on if the position is provided. However, until the ordinance is amended to allow for the expenditure of general funds, we really can't take action to appoint nor have somebody formally staffing the commission, because then you're spending general fund monies. And even if you're absorbing it within an existing person, that person is going to be paid for from the general fund. So we're kind of in a dilemma here. But we are saying you can go ahead and appoint. They would have to just be very self-sufficient in terms of scheduling their own meetings and posting their agendas and doing all of those kinds of things until such time. And then we would recommend, the city attorney, I believe, has recommended that the ordinance be amended in accordance with the ordinance, which says to give notice to the commission 30 days prior to taking an action to amend the ordinance in furtherance of its activities. And I can answer any questions.
I'm not sure if I caught that last part, but is it the city attorney's view and the CAO's view then that that before the ordinance is amended, the city is legally prescribed from spending general fund money on the commission?
Correct.
Okay.
The ordinance says that it should be funded in a revenue-neutral manner and not from the city's general fund. I cannot explain to you what the revenue-neutral manner means. I really
Right.
don't know what that phrase was intended to mean.
So we could initiate steps such as the appointment of commissioners
They
that
are all
have
unpaid,
nominal
therefore there is
cost.
there is no cost in terms of they are, by ordinance, they are not paid commissioners.
I suppose there's arguably some nominal cost just to go through the city process of
It's
setting up the appointment and having it heard by council and so on, but we can disregard that for the moment.
Yeah. The city attorney is not here, or if they're here, they're not at the table. My understanding was these were not subject to council confirmation, but they would have to confirm that.
All right. So, but we could take those steps even prior to an amendment of the ordinance,
And-
provided that it didn't implicate an expenditure from the general fund.
And
Okay.
you could appoint them, you could then give them the notice, a 30-day notice that the ordinance, as written, says should be given prior to any amendment, and then council could take the action to amend the ordinance to allow for the expenditure of general funds, which would be an action that's in furtherance of the ordinance in its entirety to allow us to implement the Health Commission.
Okay. Mr. Kretz.
I would assume that when this was written, there was presumed to be a source of funds that was not general funds. So what was that source of funds?
This is an initiative ordinance, not a city ordinance. This was written by proponents of this initiative. I don't know what they meant. I'm sorry.
So we haven't had that dialogue, because presumably they had some idea of where we could get the money other than the general fund.
They have not conveyed that to us, no.
Are there no special funds that could be used for this purpose?
None that we could identify.
And do we have the ability to seek private funds to fund this position?
I don't see why the city would be precluded from that, but I would want to confer with the city attorney on what safeguards we would want to put around that, just, for conflict of interest or whatever issues. That would be my only question.
Because presumably there's three choices. One is to fund this somehow with special funds, and I don't know what would qualify. I haven't looked at that. Another would be to fund it from the general fund, and the third would be to do outside fundraising and have it privately funded from donations.
Yeah, and I'm not saying no to the last one. I just think we would want to be thoughtful about how we set that up so that we made sure that there wasn't any undue influence or conflict of interest associated with that.
Right, and I would think that would be complicated and a general pain to deal with, so I think that would be sort of a Hail Mary if we can't find our own very modest source of funds for this particular expenditure.
And I would caution, our first report laid out a very minimal staffing of 5 positions. That was kind of on the presumption that we would be setting it up as a standalone commission. We were asked to revisit that and came back with just the very one position. However, if you look at the requirements of the ordinance, this is not like many other city commissions. This is really going to be a significant lift in terms of workload. There is a requirement that a commissioner or their staff shall attend every meeting of a county entity that has some role in the policy, the formulation policy, the enactment of policy. I'd have to pull out. That's a lot. And we've not gotten a full handle on that. They also need to do a health services, basically strategic plan. What do we want our city residents to have as their health expectations? These are not insignificant work products. So we would anticipate that once the commission was set up, our office would work with them to kind of flesh out what a basic staffing plan would look like to implement these, either between staff or consultants or something. I don't know that unless these 15 people are going to be able to work full-time, unpaid, that they could necessarily accomplish all the work outlined in the ordinance solely within the commissioners without some city support staff.
And this was created as in a settlement rather than having an item on the ballot.
Correct.
So,
Council adopted this ordinance in lieu of putting the issue on a ballot for election.
So presumably this agreement wouldn't be optional. We've agreed
committed
to what our obligations are, and we actually have to find a way to fund it and meet those obligations.
Correct.
Well, just to clarify, it wasn't an agreement. It was an ordinance passed by the council. It has the force of law. It's not an agreement. It's a law that the council passed in order to avoid the expense that the city's taxpayers would have had to incur had the initiative ordinance gone to the ballot. And how much would that cost have been?
I believe at the time it was estimated in the $4 million range because there wasn't anything else going on the ballot, but that's my memory, so forgive me if
so
I'm wrong.
because this initiative petition had been signed by a sufficient number of people, it would have cost the city certainly in the millions of dollars had it gone to the ballot. So to avoid the expense of millions of dollars, we passed the ordinance with the exact same language as had been proposed by the proponents, which clearly, it seems not to have anticipated some of the cost elements, and so that's the advantage of having an ordinance, because we can in fact amend it to fix it, whereas we couldn't have done that had an initiative gone forward.
Right, and you could not have adopted the ordinance in any other fashion than as proposed in the initiative. You couldn't have amended it at the time that you adopted it, is my understanding.
Right, which is the entire benefit of doing it this way, because now that we see that it can't work on its face, we have to fix it. We have to find a funding source. And I think your analysis is right, Mr. Kretz. There's only limited choices in doing that. You either have to do it from the general fund.
But my main point is we can't just say, well, we can't fund it, so we'll just let them do the work on their own. We really have to, in good faith, make this work properly, or certainly the folks that put this on the ballot would have a very valid lawsuit. We didn't put it on the ballot by agreeing to essentially do the same thing that the ballot required.
I have a question
Mr.
about that, sort of as a follow-up or discussion, is that what was put on there has, each piece of it has the same force of law. So at the same time, if we change item D, which is the revenue neutral, no general fund, that's just as bad or good as changing the purpose and intent of the law to make it so that it is something that can be funded without money. Yep. So I would argue that I don't know if we're I don't know the answer to this, if we're any worse off. If we change it to funded, then we could be sued because we're not going by the intent of it, which was to not have it come out of the pocket of other city services. If we change the intent of it to say don't do all these things because they cost too much, well then people who want us to do all those things are saying that we're out of compliance. It seems like this was a very poorly written proposition that is on its face impossible to implement because without changing. And if you change it, you have to decide what element to change, and I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that you change the element that has to do with funding versus the element that any of the other elements that are in it, which have to do with the purpose and the mission. And
on those questions, I think I would have to defer to the city attorney in terms of all of the legal liability associated with different things. There is a provision in the ordinance that does allow specifically to amend the ordinance in furtherance of its objective. So, I think from yes, Could we be sued because we took this general fund piece out of it? Yes, but it is probably the most de minimis risk, because that funding the commission is in furtherance of what the initiative ordinance was all about, and it's just now finding a way to actually do that. Whereas if you try to change some of the intent or scope of work, that may have more risk associated with it, but that's a city attorney really conversation.
It's a good city attorney conversation, because some of the people who may have signed that petition to get it on the ballot did so because their objective was to have it be cost neutral.
Which is why that language is included in the first
to get people to sign it to make it happen. So it's troubling the way it's written. I would like to, at some point, get the city attorney in on this conversation. Maybe not here at the table now, but here on this conversation. And then the other piece was, my colleague mentioned, well, maybe the second option was special funds, which is an interesting idea. But I wonder, and this may be a city attorney question, would that also be considered non-revenue neutral? If we were to figure out some new special fund,
I don't think so.
Is that revenue neutral or not?
I wouldn't think so, because I think that refers to the general fund in terms of its revenue neutrality.
And-
But
I don't know.
I would imagine it would depend on the source of the revenues that fund the special fund.
And
If they're new revenues that are derived from the work of the commission, then it would be revenue neutral. If they are not, then it would not be.
And,
It would be revenue that's already come in, that's being expended. Whether it's being expended from a special fund or the general fund is kind of irrelevant.
And all of our special funds that we currently have allowable, they were created for a purpose and to fund a specific thing. And we looked at special funds. Was there any special fund that we could tap into? We could not identify a special fund where this commission would be an eligible purpose. And in one of the commission meetings, somebody in the public said, well, the commission is supposed to review all the contracts that the county has and generate savings that could be used to fund the commission, except that any savings that would come back to, we don't pay for health services. Like, we don't pay the county for the Department of Public Health and the services we receive there. We do pay some permits to the county for various things, but any savings that might derive would go back to the special fund that paid for it or to the general fund, so then I'm still in the same boat of money, special funds that are not eligible or the general fund.
And if you created a new special fund,
It would have to have some revenue source, or it would be an appropriation from the general fund to the special fund, which still makes it general fund money, or else there has to be some revenue stream to that special fund. And I
sounds like the only
don't know what we would
option might
charge
be
people for.
the third one that you suggest is, authorize some fund to be created and then allow people to contribute voluntarily to that fund somehow. That would be a way to have, it's the only thing I can imagine that's revenue neutral, non-general fund, because it would take a city council action, because we would authorize the creation of the fund. I just don't know who's going to.
And I guess the one concern I would have with that's definitely an option if we create a special fund for donations to fund this, would be the issues of just, are there any conflict of interest issues, or how do we address that? And that's just a question that has to be asked and answered, not an impediment, just asked and answered and done. But then you are funding an ongoing operation that would be subject to the vagaries of donations. And what's the answer if we don't get enough money to fund the level of staff that we've authorized?
There has to be a backup plan, and so therefore there's no revenue neutrality. The only way you can achieve revenue neutrality is to have the commission generate revenues.
And I don't
That's
know,
it.
based on what they're doing, that where they would generate revenues or where they would charge fees. And, we have to be very careful that what we're charging is a fee for a service, otherwise we're imposing a tax, right?
Mr. Kretz.
just on the politics of it, I would think the likelihood of someone suing us because we didn't do anything with this commission are much greater than the likelihood of someone suing us because we spent money on health care. So as a practical matter, if we have to violate it somewhere, that would be the more likely place to violate it.
I think the likelihood is 100% either way.
It's exactly that.
Someone is going to sue us on it. I agree with you. More people are interested in suing us if we change the purpose, but there's someone out there who's going to see this as an opportunity who is going to sue us the other way. But pure speculation on both of our parts, so who knows?
Okay, before, anything else to add
Any
on
other
this?
questions, I'll answer.
Okay.
I'll do my best.
All right, before I make any recommendations on this, we do have a number of cards, and Mr. Bonin is here as well. So let's go to the cards first, and then Mr. Bonin might have some comments or questions about this item as well. So our first speaker is Bradley Hertz, followed by Stanley Chapman.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Brad Hertz with the Sutton Law Firm, and I represent Michael Weinstein, who is the lead proponent of the ballot measure, as well as the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. We do not object to the council exercising the 30-day notice provision and providing for general funds to fund the commission activities, and that was discussed at the Arts and Parks Committee hearing, and so there wouldn't be a lawsuit coming from the proponents, the committee of 5 proponents, or the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, to the extent that that's the direction that the commission goes in. We do agree with the 4 recommendations in the second report from the CAO's office to get started by having each council member appoint a commissioner, to assign the commission to the city clerk's office, for the CAO's office and the commission to evaluate the operational needs, and then for the commission to report back to the council after its first year of existence, and then finally for the city attorney to propose amendments and give notice so that there could be a funding source. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Our next speaker is Stanley Chapman, followed by Eduardo Martinez. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, gentlemen, ladies. Happy New Year's to everybody. I just came to thank you for your hard work and to ask you to please follow the recommendations that were put forth to you from the council, and we come asking for your support. And once again, thank you for your work and for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And our final speaker on this matter is Eduardo Martinez. Mr. Martinez, welcome.
Yes, good afternoon, Chairman and committee members. My name is Eduardo Martinez, and I'm here today to thank you for having, first of all, this item item in the agenda. Out of respect for the committee's time, we are going to limit our comments only to 2 of us. As you can see, we invited a group of volunteers here from ASF that identify with the importance of this issue. So here we have them. We're all here today to encourage you to continue working on this issue and to adopt the recommendations of the Art and Parks Committee. The creation of the LA City Health Commission is an important step to the public to help the fellow Angelinos to have a control of public health related issues. We thank you for the time, and we encourage you to take this your priority for the 2015 year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Bonin, I'm sorry that we kind of finished the report before you arrived, but did you have questions or comments on this matter? Do you want to bring staff back up?
No, I'm pretty good. Just a quick comment. I'm eager to see this move forward. I understand the funding is an issue. I think, though, that shouldn't hold us back from appointing our commissioners. I think they may be good at helping to identify funds. They'll certainly, I'm going to be appointing my predecessor, Mr. Rosendahl. I know he's certainly going to be very persistent in seeking funds. So I think having the appointees in place will certainly help things move along. So I'm in favor.
Okay. Any other comments, members? So my suggestion on this is the Arts Parks Committee has made a number of recommendations consistent with the CAO's recommendation, and it's clear that we have a number of unanswered budgetary and legal questions that we have to continue to address. But I think it's also clear that that doesn't deter us from initiating the process of appointing commissioners. What I would suggest is that we concur with the recommendations of the CAO, but that we request, in addition, that the CAO and the mayor work to identify an appropriate budget and budgetary sources for the commission for the 2015-2016 budget year, and that the commission itself not meet as a commission until on or after July 1st, which will be in the next budget year, which will allow us then to address some of these questions before we begin incurring costs or imposing costs on existing staff, administrative or otherwise. As it's January now and we have an ordinance to amend and we have appointments to be made and so on, I think that that's probably not much of a delay in any case. Yes, Mr. Kretz.
Well, if it is a delay, it seems like it might be an unnecessary delay because we're then saying they can't meet without staff and without expense if they choose. I don't know if that is a necessary impediment.
Well, why don't I bring our city clerk up as well, because it's impossible for them to meet without expense. They are a Brown Act body, as I understand it. Is there any question that this commission will be a Brown Act body?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
It is.
So if a majority of these commissioners meet, they will be required to provide notice and all of the other things which probably the commissioners themselves would not be able to do without support of staff, I imagine. Is that
Correct.
your assumption?
We would assign a legislative assistant to the commission. That means the only duties the only support we're able to provide currently would be strictly agendas, posting of notices, and posting the agendas and posting reports. We wouldn't be writing any reports or providing any other staff support at this time until additional funds or support. But as far as a legislative assistant, staffing the meeting and keeping notes and posting agendas, that's what we would be prepared to do once the commissioners are identified.
All the commissioners will be required to receive appropriate training in the areas of ethics, harassment, and all of the other Public Records Act, all of the other issues that we require training of our commissioners.
Right. We would look to the CAO to assist with any additional support other than that which a legislative assistant provides.
Okay. Exchanges of emails among the commissioners presumably would trigger the Public Records Act issues, which would have to be responded to if there were a request.
We would need the city attorney too, clearly.
We would need the city attorney to provide a lot of the training on the Brown Act issues and so on, because that's more their area of expertise than our offices, but we would help to facilitate all those things.
So the point is, I mean, this isn't a club. This is, this is a commission of the City of Los Angeles, and once they're appointed, they act on behalf of the City of Los Angeles, and they create liability to the City of Los Angeles for violations of any of these things. So that's my concern, is that there will inherently be cost, even without full-time staff assigned. There will necessarily be costs involved.
There will be, and there's just no way around that, but we just need to keep it as de minimis as possible and just deal with it. The other thing that has to happen is the city attorney does need to be directed to do the ordinance. I don't believe that's in my report, so I apologize.
Okay.
Or requested to prepare and present an ordinance. And I do not recall if that was included in the Arts Committee report.
The recommendation was that the council confer with the city attorney regarding options for amending the ordinance, which is probably an appropriate first step before we give direction, because we don't know really what direction to give until we're given advice from council as to what are our options, given that, I mean, you
But at some point in the
example,
process, the
refunding
city attorney has to be
options.
asked to do that.
Maybe some of those are available, some maybe they're not. We don't know yet. Mr. Bonin.
I just want to tease out with staff really how much these costs will be. Yes, how many members would be appointed total?
15.
Okay, so that's 15 members. I I imagine there are several points throughout the year, I don't know if it happens in installments or if it happens on a rolling basis, that neighborhood council members get much of this same training about Brown Act and stuff like that. Almost every week there is a commissioner who is confirmed for appointment in city council. So how much more of a burden is it to give that training to 15 more people? I mean, the training doesn't all happen individually, right? Sometimes it's done in groups.
We don't provide it, so I can't answer the question.
And we don't provide it either.
So, well,
I'm sorry.
I want to push
The
back because
answer to
both
that
of you just
question.
implied that it would be a pretty big cost, but apparently neither of you know what the cost would be.
Anything.
I don't think we implied that it would be a big cost. It just would be a cost to the general fund that is technically, legally precluded based on the way the ordinance is written. So there's really no way to stand up this commission without incurring some general fund costs, even though the ordinance says the general fund can't pay for it. That's really all that point was about. I'm sorry, Councilman.
Okay, because I don't think that cost is really going to be all that significant. I think a department could absorb that and nobody would blink. I mean, it's 15 more people that get the same training that the new airport commissioner, the new port commissioner, the new rec and parks commissioner gets. So I don't know that that's a reason to delay.
No, and I agree with you. I don't think it'll be a huge cost. In fact, even the $130,000 estimate in the report, I'm not sure. But whether if it's $130,000 or $130,000, the fact is that we have an ordinance on the books that has the force of law that very specifically says that we cannot spend general fund money, and not even a penny of it. And it's not up to us, no matter how well-intentioned or no matter how much we like an idea, we can't just disregard the law in order to, because it's not going to be that bad. That's not the issue. It's the state of the law. So at least until we have an opportunity to confer with the city attorney and identify what our options are given the state of the law, I certainly couldn't support spending any money at all, direct or indirect, on it. So, Mr. Kretz.
Well, there's also a question of whether spending money means pay as you go, because it's also possible that we could expend $5,000 and at some point later we get that paid off in a prescribed way. It doesn't mean that we spent the money. The question is, have you spent the money only if it's never reimbursed, or must you pay as you go and have the money in an account the moment you expend it?
And I assume that's something the city attorney could interpret by looking at the ordinance and give us advice on, but I'm not prepared to make that judgment at this point. So that's why I think, not wanting to delay things, we should move forward with our appointments and get all these other things in process. Get a report back from the city attorney to the council as provided in recommendation number 5. Instruct the CAO and I'd like to ask the commission to actually look at their workload, look at their mission, look at implementation of what their mission is going to be, and then, start developing a budget. But even that process is going to be a Brown Act meeting that's going to incur some costs. So I just don't know how to get to that point without having some cost incurrence. So unless I'm missing something, again, it's going to be minor, but it is what the ordinance says.
Right.
Maybe what we can do is kind of expedite that process of getting the city attorney to provide options to the council. We start with the appointments now, and maybe rather than setting a date, if we can provide that there won't be a meeting of the commission until after the council takes further action regarding the ordinance. Maybe we can get that done in 2 months.
Sounds good.
And if we
That
get
sounds
that
like a
done
fair
quickly,
approach.
and if we find out that the budgetary impacts are very minor, then there's no reason to wait until the next fiscal year.
That sounds much better.
Okay. Erica, did that make sense enough, what I said? So in other words, we'll adopt the recommendations of the CAO, provided that we ask that the city attorney report back to the council regarding the options to amend the ordinance, and request the city attorney to prepare and present an amending ordinance as needed, as stated in recommendation number 5, and that we instruct the appointed commissioners not to meet until such time as the council has had an opportunity to act on the recommendations of the city attorney.
Very good.
Does that make sense?
Yes, the only thing I'm cautious about, and again, it's unfortunate the city attorney is not here, but the way the ordinance is written is for, the ordinance cannot be amended until the commissioners have been notified. Presumably, that's to give them some input.
Yeah.
So if you preclude them from meeting, can they provide input? I mean, it's kind of, again, back to the catch-22. Do you incur costs, or...
Yeah, well, if that's
I mean,
the
that
case, then-
provision of the ordinance simply states that that the ordinance can't be amended without 30 days' notice to the commission. The inference is that that would give them the opportunity to meet and comment and have input on, or at least comment on, whatever it is council wanted to do. It's not explicit, but I think a reasonable implication.
But they could show up and speak as individuals at committee or
At council.
There you go. Each of the
There is that.
15 each of the 15 commissioners could be individually notified, and if they show up at a public meeting open to the public to provide their
Right.
comment, they're presumably, I'm spitballing this, presumably that would not be a Brown Act violation, but that's for the city attorney to decide
Right.
and instruct
Yes.
us. That's not our issue to resolve right now.
Okay.
Okay. Does that make sense?
I think that works. I think it's important for us to appoint members. I think there'll be more momentum behind this. I think it'll be easier to identify funds if there are people who are coming to committee who have the appointment, who are actually lobbying for the commission itself, and I think that'll help.
Okay. Very good. Well, if there's no objection then, as amended, that will be the action of this committee. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming down. Thank you for your continuing commitment to this effort.
Good spitballing, Mr. Chair.
All right. All right, that brings us to item number 10. Number 10.
Item number 10 is the City Controller and City Administrative Officer Joint Report relative to the results of a review of the disbursements of special funds interest earnings for all city departments.
Wei Lau with the Office of the Controller, and
Good afternoon.
Anime Yutan is next to me from the CO. Do you want me to go through the highlights of the report, or you have very specific questions?
Why don't you cover the highlights, and then
Okay.
we'll come back and redirect you.
Okay, so as you may recall, back in April 2014, our offices reported to the committee on the results of our review of all the city special funds based on information provided from the departments. One of the conclusions from that review, and at the time we had 970 special funds, one of the conclusions from the review was that there were about 149 funds in which the departments reported the distribution of interest, and that information was different from finance's records. So we asked the departments to work with finance to go through both records and see which one was correct. That's the report before you today. Some of the results that we found was that interest earning on our retirement and pension funds was going to the general fund and not to the special funds, and that has now been changed in accordance with the department's report as well as the city attorney opinion that we received on this. There are 4 funds that you will probably see report backs on where we need further assistance from the city attorney's office on the proper distribution of interest. Fund 438, Construction Services Fund, Fund 492, Special Safety and Paramedic Communications Equipment Tax Fund, Fund 209, Recreation and Parks, Park and Recreation Sites and Facilities, and then we have Fund 342, the TDA Fund. So one of the other things that we note as a recommendation in our report on a go-forward basis, we would ask that the city attorney be explicit if there is an ordinance on the fund to specify the distribution of interest, and if there isn't, that departments stated in their reports for council to act on the creation of funds so that this can be captured for the record. I have the departments that we've asked to report back on in the room with us in case you have any specific questions for them.
Okay, members? This is another important step forward, so
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you.
We've had, as everyone knows, great challenges in getting the city's arms around its special funds and how costs are allocated from special funds and when the general fund should be recapturing administrative costs and why the general fund continues to incur administrative costs for special funds that no longer serve a purpose. So this is another good step forward in maintaining that transparency and continuing to keep an eye on this. So I appreciate it. I note that
And all this data is available on Control Panel LA. We update it every time we have a new fund. So every month you can go in, you can see the balances on all the funds. If you're not familiar with using FMS or you're from the public and you don't have access to FMS.
Yeah, am I reading this correctly that 148 of the special funds total, 120 of the 2013, 2014 funds, and then 28 of the funds on Attachment A are closed due to inactivity?
Yeah, we
That's
go through
correct.
cleanup every year. This was a big one.
That's what avoids us having the kinds of errors and mistakes that we've seen in the past, so it's a good step forward. All right.
Thank you.
Then without
We
objection,
recommend that you adopt the recommendations in our report.
and without objection, that will be the action of the committee. Thank you very,
Thank you.
okay. Thank you. That brings us to item number 11.
Item number 11 is a motion, Bloomingfield, Buscaino, relative to authorizing the Department of Transportation to accept funds from AT&T to cover the cost of expedited reviews of traffic control plans.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Selwyn Hollins, Department of Transportation. This is a motion that will enable us to accept funds so that we can help move forward with a lot of AT&T traffic control plan reviews. In the last year, there has been a substantial increase among many of our utility agencies as well as developers for plan reviews. AT&T alone represents about 3/4 of all the plan review requests we get at our district offices. Last calendar year, we processed over 4,000 plan reviews, and literally 3/4 were AT&T. They submit about 200 a month, and of course, with that volume, it also impacts other companies who are waiting for their plans to be reviewed. So AT&T we have been working with them very closely over the last, since this summer, and they have willingly enabled us to, we started one process in October. We did $15,000 worth. We made major gains for them, but we need to continue this moving forward.
Okay. So city's receiving $35,000?
Yes, the AT&T hand delivers a check up front
And
so that we can...
That you anticipate that that's full cost recovery for their...
Absolutely. And we work with them every week. We provide them a detailed accounting of the work we've done, the hours that we've contributed to performing their particular plan reviews.
Very good. Thank you. We have one speaker, Eric Previn, on that matter. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. It is Eric Previn, city resident from Studio City and also a candidate in the 2nd District race, full disclosure. This item is of interest. It is a kind of expedited service for AT&T. Now, AT&T we all know quite well, large company doing a lot of business here in our community. I'm concerned about other residents who are getting skipped over because of the expedited nature of their willingness to pay money to fund kind of white glove service, as you mentioned. They're in touch very regularly. I know people have frustration with Los Angeles city government and getting some of these permits, including some of the seated members in front of me. I'm concerned about this process. I feel like it sends a message. The next item is also related. It's Westfield taking a large chunk to expedite plans. And though I absolutely support the idea of efficiency, I'm concerned that regular residents are being pushed back in the queue. And when I look closely at this, it does seem that it's overtime of workers that is going to be used to get this done in general. But is there a bright line on that? And who decides how much they are paying for this particular service to get it expedited? The other item, Westfield, had a substantial, they doubled it. It went from 75 to 150 grand, if I read it correctly. And I just don't know, where the boundaries are there, and is it this group that is deciding that that's the appropriate fee to pay? Because you guys have influence from a lot of characters, as you probably know. Both of those entities are well represented by lobbyists, and those lobbyists, you mentioned delivering checks, do deliver checks, not just to the city government, but to the office holder accounts and to various other accounts. So this is an area where I think, and I'm going to try to wrap both of these items, I won't come back on the next item, into one. I think we really have to look closely at these deals. I understand the city has financial difficulties, and we all are concerned about that, but by creating a pay-to-play model, we run into conflict of interest issues and difficulties for ordinary residents who are mired and don't have the opportunity to hire Matt Kanabe to get it done. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for rolling those comments together. If there's no questions about number 12, that was going to be a consent item. Yes, Mr. Kretz.
On number 11,
12, either.
On number 11, this is also just an ancillary thing. For some reason, this is graffiti issue day for me. As long as we're expediting things for AT&T, I'd like to ask them to expedite a site of horrible graffiti in Century City at 2010 Century Park East on a wall, which we've been asking to be corrected for over 5 years without success.
An AT&T wall?
An AT&T owned wall. So
I don't know if there's an AT&T representative present today, but
maybe we can pass that along. If they're getting incredible expediting, maybe 5 years is enough on this.
As long as Mr. Corretz doesn't expedite my request about the AT&T site in East Westchester that we've been asking them to clean up.
Maybe we can ask for both of those in the process.
All right, well, I think we can consider that request to have been made, and if there's no objection, Mr.
No objection. I mean, I guess I'll make one comment on these items is, when we're talking about getting the cost recovery from the, in this case AT&T, the other case Westfield, by them paying the actual city costs of doing this, that means that the little guy down the road, there's only so much money to get these things done, will happen, his process, approvals will happen that much faster because money is not going into, the money, that group is sufficiently funded to do only so much. So when you get more money in, it's going to help everybody. And so getting full recovery is a good thing.
So if there's no objection, we can take 11 and 12 together, and if there's no objection to those two matters, it'll be the action of the committee to adopt those two motions. All right, that brings us then to our closed session matters. So if I have no closed session cards, so public comment on items 1 through 4 is now closed, and we will take, is there a
1 through 5, sir.
I'm sorry? Oh, I'm sorry, 1 through 5. Is there a preference on the part of the city attorney as to priority of those matters? All right, we'll go in order then. Let's start with item number 1, please.
believe me, this is in the interest of efficiency.
Yeah.
Just give me 1 second.
So just to make sure the door is open, we're not in closed session yet. We're not in closed session. Yeah, go ahead.
So in accordance with the California Government Code 54960.1.b, I'm demanding that the Budget and Finance Committee of the City of Los Angeles cure or correct the action that it took on item 6 at its meeting on December 8th, 2014. The committee's approval of that item, as discussed, violated California Code 54954.2, which states that no action or discussion shall be undertaken on any item not appearing on the posted agenda. Item 6 was presented on the agenda but did not reference the Brown Act. A cynical member of the public might say that the Brown action component of agenda item 6 was trying to be sneaked in without anyone noticing. He or she might want to know why there is not a single reference to the Brown Act in the many paragraphs describing the rationale and critical importance of having a land use CEQA panel and why it makes sense for private developers to pay for Brown Act suits against the city. Regardless, no reasonable person could say that the single mention of the Brown Act at the end of a recommendation letter buried in a 70-page agenda packet fulfills the Brown Act requirement that all items must appear on the posted agenda. The fact that the outside legal panel will be used for Brown Act litigation is material to the public's ability to assess whether the proposed action is in their best interest. Members of the public who follow Brown Act issues and so diligently search all meeting agendas for proposals involving the Brown Act cannot possibly be expected to have understood that by litigation challenging private development projects, unquote, the posted agenda item really meant, quote, litigation challenging private development projects and challenging city government compliance with the Brown Act. An aggravating circumstance connected to all of the above is that at the full council meeting on December 16, 2014, 3 members of the public signed up to comment on the item discussed above, but were denied, even though there were no other speakers at the meeting at the time, and so the reduction in meeting efficiency would have been minimal. The grounds for denying those 3 members of the public a chance to comment on the item at hand were that the opportunity for such comment had already been given during the Finance and Budget Committee meeting. Given the flawed nature of the Finance and Budget Committee, this silencing of the public takes on added significance, unfortunately in a negative way. I'm almost done. In this case, any curing or correcting obviously requires that the Finance and Budget Committee's approval of item 6, and so necessarily the full council's vote on the issue, must be rescinded so that members of the public can exercise their legal rights to comment on and so participate in the public debate about item 6 before your committee votes on it. You have 30 days to respond to this cure or correct letter, and I just want to say in conclusion, I know these things are difficult, but it is critically important to include the public in these debates, and I know that this body values the input of its many residents, even though there are challenges with Brown Act compliance. Okay. It is not expensive to hold a Brown Act meeting, and I appreciate your taking care of this and forwarding this to the city attorney. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Now we are in closed session. All right. Members, previously on item number 7, I asked that we receive and file the report. I'd like to, without objection, reconsider that item now. If there is no objection, I'd like to hold it in committee and continue the matter so that we can have additional reports as need be on that matter. So if there's no objection, that will be the action of the committee on item number 7. And if there's no other business before us, we are adjourned. Right.